Last week I dumped on the Claws of Karanak, and this week I want to make amends. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you all doing today? So despite Claws of Karanak being one of my favourite warbands in Warcry, purely for their theme and their model design, I cannot stand to play them because they simply have too many things going against them, namely everything. And I am not even exaggerating when I say that. Feel free to check out my video from last week, but douche, I go to town on the Claws of Karanak and I stand by every single word. And after reading a lot of your comments, it seems that a lot of you agree with that take. So this week I'm revisiting the Claws of Karanak, but this time from a different perspective. This week I am going to try and fix the Claws of Karanak. But before we get into all of that, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, or using my Element Games affiliate link down below when buying some new Warcry gubbins. A huge shout out to my patrons and members who you can find on screen now. Badoosh. But with all of that out of the way, it's time to get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
And we are back. So how am I going to fix the Claws of Karanak? Well, simply put, I'm going to go through all of their rules again, but this time with the lens of how could I make this rule better or this profile better in the ways that Games Workshop are more likely to do. This will not be a wish list of massive rules changes. This is going to be very small tweaks to the faction to make them more competitive, but not break them. My aim here is to move Claws of Karanak from the depths of hell to somewhere in the mid-tier, whilst not going off the rails and also not disrespecting the design work that went in the Claws of Karanak to begin with. So I think it's fitting to start with their battle trait, No Claw Unbloodied. And the issue with this battle trait is that it does nothing. It is such a low impact battle trait. It does next to no damage. The damage is not guaranteed. It is super restrictive and it just doesn't really play into the Claws of Karanak's strengths or any of their abilities. It's just a little bit naff and I am not a fan of this at all. How I would fix this is to tie it directly into their reaction, but douche, their reaction is also kind of terrible. Their reaction never works because if they are running away from you, you can't catch them and attack them. You are not fast enough on average to ever actually make use of their reaction. It's really bad. But how can we fix that? And simply put, how we fix this is by changing the battle trait to synergize with that reaction. So how I would change this is I would take inspiration from the Iron Jaws battle trait. If you don't know, Badoosh, the Iron Jaws battle trait is all about if your opponent waits, you get to move, right? I don't want that for Claws of Karanak. What I want is for the Claws of Karanak to instead synergize off disengaging. So when an enemy disengages, you can make a bonus move action, and provided you end within 1 inch of that enemy fighter who disengaged, you're good to go. And of course, because someone has disengaged, you can trigger your reaction, again, +1 attack, and now you're actually in range to use that +1 attack in combat. And if they want to run away again, you can battle trait again and chase them down. This plays into the theme that the Claws of Karanak are constantly hunting cowards. They would chase them down, but currently there's actually no way to chase anyone down in Claws of Karanak, and this little change plays into the theme. It makes the reaction stronger, and the trait itself isn't massively overtuned because disengaging is comparatively rare in Warcry compared to waiting, so I think there's a fair balance there. So moving from the battle trait, and by extension, the reaction, we are not going to change the reaction at all. The reaction is fine with this battle trait change. Let's actually look at their abilities. So Blood for the Blood God, but douche, we aren't going to change. Blood for the Blood God is a generic Khorne ability, and Claws of Karanak are Khorne. We can't really take that away. We can't really change it, and that's fine. It's a fairly strong ability. We ain't going to touch it. Now, Flaming Breath is my first big with Claws of Karanak. And the reason for that is I feel like Flaming Breath has been power crept to the point where it's just a bad AoE ability. That 1 inch range is fine, I guess. The fact that it hits on a 4+ is just not great. The 3 damage is actually very nice. What I would do here is I would simply just change this ability almost wholesale to the Wrecker ability for Iron Jaws, which is just an AoE where you do flat damage based on half the dice value of that damage. However, where the Wrecker has a big 3-inch AoE, I would keep Flaming Breath at 1 inch and purely change how the damage is applied and how much damage you do. This change will give the Hound of Wrath a real solid place within the Claws of Karanak, and that is doing AoE crowd control goodness. The thing is fast, it's fairly squishy. Flaming Breath allows it just to get in there and start doing AoE damage to chaff before it eventually dies, and I think it'll be a lot of fun to play around with, especially on a movement 7 piece. Going on to Pack Hunters doesn't really do anything. Being able to use Inspiring Presence functionally on agile rune-marked Claws of Karanak models isn't that impactful when your agile guys are simply your Bloodwhelps, who aren't that great, and your Hound of Wrath, who really needs help to get into combat, and this doesn't really do that. What I would do here is really simple. I would just wholesale take this Skinner Kin double, which allows you to basically do what this double does, but you also get a bonus move action on the thing you're going to activate. This would turn Pack Hunters into an incredibly strong utility pick, but it would remain balanced because the main thing you are targeting is that Hound of Wrath, and the Hound of Wrath is still not all that good. Remember, the Hound of Wrath only has 18 wounds and is only toughness 4. This thing will die, and its attack profile is fine, but it's not fantastic. You aren't doing this to move a massive Titan, remember. You're doing this to move something that's fairly middling, and this makes the Hound of Wrath so much better because it can fulfill its goal within the warband, which is to get in there, mulch stuff, and then die. And currently he can't do that, and this change to Pack Hunters completely fixes that. When it comes to horrifying trophies, I wouldn't change this. It's actually a pretty strong ability when it comes to shutting down abilities. It's a big AoE, and sure, you've got to get a kill, but I'm actually okay with that. I would just leave this as is. It's a perfectly fine thematic ability. I don't see any reason to change it. In a similar vein to Blood for the Blood God, I also wouldn't change Scent of Weakness. This is a fairly generic Chaos Corn ability. You get a kill, a big +1 attack AoE in a thematically 8-inch range is absolutely fine. I am completely fine keeping Scent of Weakness as it is. And finally, going on to their quad, I love this quad in theory, but in execution, that wounds characteristic 20 or less really limits what it can do. What I would do is I would just keep this as is, right? I would keep this as is, but then just remove the wounds characteristic limit. This might thematically seem a little bit silly because then you're going to be like theoretically suplexing things like chimeras, and that's a little bit silly. You could maybe put in like a rune mark restriction that you can't suplex mounted things, you can't suplex monsters. But the wounds characteristics itself isn't an issue because why can't a Pack Lord ram his axes into a Stormcast Annihilator and then suplex him into the ground behind him? There's no reason why he can't. It's hilarious to think about, and that is the only change I would make there. It would be a lot of fun to do. Allow me to do that. So that's the abilities and the battle traits, and ultimately I don't think I've changed all that much. Out of the 6 abilities, I'm only changing 3 and not by all that much. And sure, I'm changing the battle trait completely, but it synergizes with the reaction, which I'm not changing at all. But none of this would actually make the Claws of Karanak really playable because the Claws of Karanak have issues beyond their fairly disjointed, fairly wonky rules. It also comes down to their stats and the cost for those stats as a whole. And now we're going to go over what I would change here. Now, I'm not going to change any stat lines. Games Workshop have proven time and time again, unless they're re-releasing models like, you know, a whole faction rework, they don't really change profiles. What they do is change points cost. So what we're going to do here is go through and just give my suggested or my preferred or my wanted points cost for the Claws of Karanak to make them a really funky warband. And starting with the Pack Lord, I would drop this guy by a full 20 points. Make this guy 185 points. At 205, he's already more expensive than his contemporaries. And even at 200 points, like, that profile is okay. At 185 points, he really feels like he falls in line with other profiles like this, whilst not being too overtuned. And that's really it. The Hound of Wrath, on the other hand, he already took a pretty hefty points decrease to go to 170 points. And I think this was to put him in line with the Shrike talent for Corvus Cabal. We saw this with the Eskurgan Trueblades as well. Their big sort of like Shrike talent equivalent also got a pretty hefty points decrease to bring it more in line with the reduction that the Shrike talent had. The issue is the Shrike talent is by far and away better than them both, and it's not even close, both in terms of stats and rules. And when it comes to the Hound of Wrath, I would actually cut the Hound of Wrath by 20 points. Make this guy like 150 points, right? Make him 150 points. It's a very aggressive pointing to encourage people to bring the Hound of Wrath in their list. With their changes to their rules with Pack Hunters, Flaming Breath, their battle trait that I suggested, 150 point Hound of Wrath really feels like a solid inclusion in your list while still being too expensive to really spam. Currently, you can replace the Hound of Wrath with just about anything and get better value. He is pretty much just a net negative in your list currently, and that is largely down to his points for his defensive stats. But dropping him to 150, I think makes him competitive and definitely worth taking. When it comes to the brutalizers, I think these guys are a little bit overtuned, and that's because of their toughness 3. I would maybe drop these both down to 110. Equally, I don't think there should be a points difference. I think the meat hook is actually worthy of having the same price as the brutalizer with shredder blades, and these two should be the same cost. So like I said, 110 I think is a perfect place to land them, or maybe just pull the brutalizer with shredder blades down to 115. I'm also okay with that. Now, the blood whelps are the place that really hinder the Claws of Karanak, and I'm going to make a suggestion that might be a little bit controversial because dropping points by a lot on chaff is always risky. I would actually drop the blood whelps to 75 points. 75. And that might sound a little bit crazy for a movement 4 thing with 12 wounds, but if you compare a 75 point blood whelp to a gut ripper in Cruel Boys, I think that pricing actually kind of makes sense, and it would open up Claws of Karanak to all kinds of things. With all of these changes combined, with the changes to brutalizers, the changes to the blood whelps, to the Pound of Wrath, to the MacLeod, you'll save over 100 points, which will allow you to take another model in your warband, and that's a big change. The goal here isn't just to arbitrarily reduce their costs for the sake of it. The goal here is to reduce their points across the board enough to allow them to take an additional model. You can do that currently if you drop all their cool stuff for just blood whelps, but that's kind of boring. I don't want to make them more boring by making you just take a whole bunch of chaff. What I want is to make every single profile useful and interesting and worthy of play, whilst also increasing the size of the warband with aggressive points reductions and making them feel good on the battlefield, because currently everything is a little bit overpriced and nothing feels good to play. These changes to their rules, these changes to their points, I think would make Claws of Karanak a wonderful warband to play on the battlefield. But sadly, here's the rub. I don't think that any of these changes will come into play. We might see some points changes in an FAQ, but where Games Workshop is right now, I just don't think they're willing to go in and change warbands. I don't think they're willing to go in and especially change 2nd edition warbands, because they have physical cards and people like their physical cards, and I don't think Games Workshop are really in the business of wanting to piss off people by changing them up and making those cards invalid, right? And that's a fair stance to take, but when the Claws of Karanak are so bad, I think exceptions can be made, right? Because people have spent money on Claws of Karanak and they've just never played them because they are awful on the battlefield. They feel bad to play. They're one of the only warbands I've ever played where I feel bad playing them because they just don't have anything going for them. And when that's the case for one of your more recent warbands, when that's one of the only Warcry warbands you can buy on the Games Workshop website now, and it's this bad, I think aggressive measures to actually make them playable without massively rewriting the rules, right? I've tried to keep the rules changes in particular as small as possible, right? To make them just little tweaks to make them a little bit better than they were without changing the feel of the Claws of Karanak, whilst also making their battle trait and their reaction actually usable. But of course, I am a competitive player. I am looking at this from a competitive standpoint. But even from a casual perspective, I think these changes would actually make Claws of Karanak really fun to play. And I would love to see them one day implemented. And if you want to take these ideas and run with them, feel free to take them, play, test them, and let me know in the comments down below if they're actually worthwhile, if they made any real difference, if the Claws of Karanak were actually fun on the battlefield. Most of this was just on the top of my head, my little knee-jerk reactions to what I think Claws of Karanak could be with a bit of love and care. But let me know down below, do you think these are good ideas? Do you have better ideas? What would you do with Claws of Karanak? What would you do with the low-tier warbands in general? Would you go back in and rework them? Or would you rather Games Workshop invest their resources elsewhere to make new warbands? I don't know, you let me know, and until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Hey all, and welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shouts out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Maps, Sable Saber, Steph, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, Tough, Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for supporting the channel, and I will catch you all next time. Ta-ra!